In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful. Hello everybody. How are you? I hope everything's will be well. And for today I want to start with chapter 3. We've discussed about the chapter 3 previous sessions. I will review the material we talked about previous session, and then we will go to the new topics. As you know, previous week we talked about chapter 3. We have started this chapter. Its title is How We Know What We Know, and we talk about method in psycholinguistics. We discuss about this topic that psycholinguistics is a specific field of study. It is different from other fields. For example, it's different from physics or chemistry or any other kind of this science, because these sciences are studied in the laboratory, and the scientists can experiment everything and control the condition. But when we are talking about psycholinguistics, we are dealing with a course which is the main topic is humans, and its subject is human, and it is somehow a difficult and more complicated topic, and so it's somehow different from physics, chemistry, or other courses, because you cannot study psycholinguistics in laboratory. You are not able to control the environment and all the affecting factors. So you are dealing with a very, in fact, complicated idea. After this topic, we talked about a kind of responses and what can we measure. We talk about measurement, and we also talk about offline versus online measures, respectively. And we said that the online measure is different from offline one. Later on, we started the tasks that collect data from conscious responses. How we can collect the data from conscious responses. One of the major tools for collecting data was questionnaire. Last week we talked about questionnaire 2, and we said that the prototypical offline measure is questionnaire. And it means that you literally are asking people for their judgment about what they just encounter, or you may, for example, actually give a questionnaire, which means a set of questions written on a piece of paper, and give it to the examiners and ask them to answer or select the best answer. We talk about the scales. Sometimes we ask the examinee to select or give a score to the specific, for example, specific question. For example, if we ask about in a restaurant, they want to ask about the accommodations, the quality of services, or anything else, and wants the guests to give a mark from 1 to 7. 1 is the weakest one, and the 7 means very good, and it means that the passengers, the guests, those people who receive that services are in fact satisfied with the services provided there. We call this linker scales, and as I've told you, these Likert scales involving asking people to circle a number on a scale. Anyway, the other method for gathering data that for today I want to talk about is button presses. Our first somewhat technological techniques is the button presses. Button presses, why we call it technological? Because in this method of gathering data, you're dealing with using technology, in which there is some buttons that the participant must press that buttons. Unless the time is taken to press a button, a response to stimulus is recorded. This technique is generally just a fancy it is a very fancy, in fact, technique. Okay, a button presses, as we talk about it, we say our first and somewhat technical or technological technique is a button presses. Unless the time it takes to press a button in response to a stimulus is recorded, this technique is generally just a fancy version of questionnaire. It means it's somehow more interesting than questionnaire itself. However, it's possible to record how quickly someone responds with a button press. And in this case, a new kind of information is gathered. For example, how long it takes the human processing system to make a decision to respond. This is still toward the offline end of scale, as are all of the tasks that collect the data from conscious responses. However, some applications of it are considered more online than others. It means for presses or button presses, we have both versions, online and offline. If we want to measure the speed of selecting the correct responses, it's better to record these responses automatically and in an online manner. Otherwise, it is a fancy kind or fancy version of a questionnaire, and we can use it offline. The button press task is perhaps the most versatile of all things that we can do to collect data involving response times. The possibilities are nearly endless. First, we can ask participants to press a button in response to any kind of question or judgment. We place the questionnaire in front of the examiner and wants them to press the button in response to any kind of question that they can see. Anyway, we can ask them to judge whether a given letter, for example, given letter strip, for example, in a word trip, is a real word or not. We show the form and ask the examinee to answer these questions. We want participants to select whether this is, for example, a trip which has been written in the form of THRIP is a real word or not. He or she may decide about these questions. We can ask people to press a button as they read each word of the sentence. More on this in a moment. We can even ask them to keep pressing one button as they read. For example, we give them a passage and we say, whenever you finish the reading, you must press this button. But switch to, for example, different button on the word where a sentence stops making any sense to them. We can ask the questioner, ask the participant to answer yes or no to a question that quiz their comprehension of what they read. For example, they read a passage and there are so many questions who ask and want to measure the comprehension of the participant. So the participant must, for example, select between yes and yes or no for each question. One application for button press warrants a little more discussion, and the task that involves it has its own name and acronyms. We call this self-paced reading, SPR. Self-paced, abbreviated form is SPR, or self-paced reading. As the name suggests, here in this method, participants are asked to read at their own pace. It means by the speed they like, or read it by their own pace. They are not forced to accommodate themselves with a specific pace. They continue or keep reading by their own pace. The most basic type of SPR works like this. For example, I want to explain it. Participants are asked to read silently anything that they see on the screen. There are so many text or anything on the screen. They have to read it silently, not with a loud voice. Let's say the examiner is interested in how people process sentences. For example, a common application area of SPR. And so the experiment is going to involve showing sentence to the participant. We show the sentence to the participant. If the experimenter or the examiner is only interested in how long it takes to read the entire sentence, she or he may display the entire sentence all at once. Okay? If the examiner wants just to examine, or he or she is interested in how long it takes this examinee or this participant to read this passage, so he or she must show the entire sentence at once or at the moment. The participant read the sentence silently, then press a button. As soon as they have finished, they start reading, and when they finished, they press the button. Voila! We have a data point. How long it took between when the sentence appeared on the screen, how long it took between when the sentence appeared on the screen and when the participant pressed the button. We measure this duration. Usually, however, participants do not read the sentence at all once, but see it only in small chunks, so that the sentence is slowly revealed word by word or phrase by phrase, controlled. It means paced, if you will, by the participant button presses. It means, in this case, some cases, the participant may not read the sentences. And it seems that when you show the page or the written text on the screen, they divided it into different chunks. for example, phrases, different sentences, and they put them together in order to grasp the meaning. And whenever they think that they have finished, they must press the button. One particular implementation of this type of method uses dashes to indicate the length of upcoming words and give the general shape of a sentence that we will be read. For example, a participant in SPR, a person who want to participate in this method, SPR study, might for particular trial see the following. For example, if you look at the pages I will upload in your system, on page, in fact, 42, you can see these sentences. But see it only in small chunks, so that the sentence is slowly revealed word by word, phrase by phrase, control or anything. I told you that a participant in a SPR study might for a particular trial see the following: some chunks or different slots, each of which stands for a chunk of a speech. Then when they press a response button, the first word is revealed. When they press a response button, they want to press a response, the first word is revealed. For example, the first word is, the first chunk, the first word is Sarah. Then when they press the button again, the next word is revealed. They must press each button to see new words. They press the first button, they will see Sarah. When they press the second button, the next word is revealed. For example, which is the word admired. And the first word is the turn back into dashes. And again, turn back into dashes. There is different dashes, slots, which compose of different dashes. Anyway, the participant proceeds to read the entire sentence in this way. Press a button, reveal a word, and then that word will be vanished and change into dashes. The participant proceeds to read the entire sentence in this way, and then would move on to read the sentence of the following trial in the same way. There are variations on this. In fact, some studies do not use dashes at all. Some studies lump together phrases instead of presented things, just one word at a time or anything. So there is so many diversity. It's depend on the examiner interest. SPR is sometimes, or a self-paced reading is sometimes mostly jokingly referred to a poor man's eye tracking. And it certainly has some limitations that eye tracking can avoid. However, it has been an incredibly useful measure over the years, and during the different decades and times this method has been used, providing a huge amount of important and informative data about how we process written language, especially at a sentence level, and it will undoubtedly continue to do so. This is a press button method, or button presses, which one way of gathering information, and it can have different forms based on the different interest of the examiner. Another one is vocal response. The third method for gathering information is vocal responses. The last of the conscious responses we will talk about here is vocal response. As the name suggests, what does a vocal response means? This applies to cases where the participant verbalizes their responses. They have to pronounce their responses, they have to give their response orally by speaking. So we say the participant must verbalize their response. This type of response method is used not only in experiments that are interested in language production, the obvious things, but also in experiments concerned with things related to comprehension as well. So it's not just dealing with productions, it's at the same time dealing with comprehension as well. Like button presses, this is a response that can be applied to all kinds of questions. And just like button presses, there are two kinds of data that can be gotten. First one, the nature of the response. For example, what the participant actually says and how long the responses takes. Both of them are important. The duration, when I say how long, it means the duration of the response is very important. And also, the second one is the nature of response. What the participant want to say. What is his or her answer is very important alongside the time or durations of this speaking. Unlike both of these points are the common points and are the same with button presses, but there are some differences between button presses and this method, which we call it a vocal response. Unlike button presses, though, in which the only timing data is really just how quickly someone presses a button, vocal response data can provide other timing data. In addition to onset, is that when the vocal responses starts, the things that is similar to button press data, we can analyze the duration of utterances or parts of utterance, the duration of utterances or part of utterance. For example, in this method, we are able to measure how long it takes someone to say a particular word, or even a vowel within a word, or a consonant within a word. So we can measure how long it takes anybody to say a particular item. In terms of nature of the response, verbal responses are also a much richer source of data than button presses. It is very richer compared to button presses. We typically have at most 7 different possible responses, and usually more like 2 or 3 with verbal responses. You can analyze acoustic information, like, for example, since you can hear the speaker sounds, you can analyze the intonation as well as the speech error. You can see the speech error, speech production error, which words the participant use out of the potentially very large set of options. What kind of words must be selected by the speakers? And also you can analyze the syntax that the participant used. Beside the selection of words, you can analyze the syntax that a participant used, and so on. So you can measure the different element in this method, and that is why we call it more richer, or we say that it is more richer than press button. This task can be used to investigate process that underline speech production, of course, but it can also be useful for testing things that requires a complex response in a macro-naturalistic way. For example, if you're interested in working memory, okay, you may be interested in working memory and language, and you want to find the relationship between working memory and language. You might use a vocal response method to have participants verbally recall a word or sentence that they have recently encountered, or the word and sentences they have recently heard. You must use the verbal response to measure this, and rather than having them write it down. By writing some things down, you cannot measure, for example, the working memory and the language, or in fact the relationship between working memory and relation. So we have a different method for gathering information or collecting the data. We can use questionnaire, we can use button presses, or vocal productions, but each of these methods have got their own specific application, and it's depend of the examiner's interest and a kind of in fact variables he or she want to measure. All of these methods are important. They have they've got their own strong and weak points as well. Anyway, the next topic is tasks that collect data from unconscious responses. We may need some tasks that we may collect data from unconscious responses. It means responses which are not aware of. One of them is one of these tasks is eye tracking. Eye tracking is again, as its name suggests, eye tracking involves tracking the movement of the eyes. It means following the movement of the eyes, or analyzing, investigating the movement of the eyes. To understand the usefulness of this kind of response, it's important to understand, at least in general way, how the eyes works during normal scene perceptions and reading, and let's start there. So, before using eye tracking method, you have to gather enough knowledge about the quality and a manner in which the eye works during a normal scene perception when a person's look at a normal scene. Okay, for the most part, our conscious experiment of seeing things in that our eye glides from the things to things as we take in the world. When we want to look at some things, our eyes moves smoothly over to it. We gaze at it in a moment or two, then move on to the next things. So we smooth, our eyes smooth in line, and pass a word after word. But sometimes you may gaze at a specific chunk, specific word, but later on you will move on the next thing, on the next things. However, this is not exactly how the eyes actually works. Okay, it doesn't mean it is the process of how, or it is not it's not exactly how the eyes actually work. Instead, except when we are tracking an object that is moving through our field of view, like watching a car as it moves past us, our eyes take in the world in a series of jerky movements. Okay, our eyes take in the world in a series of jerky movements. They look fixated on one thing, then zip or saccade to the next thing. This series of saccade and fixation is how we actually take in most visual information. This is how our eyes see the things in outside words. Our eyes rest on some things briefly, and then even more briefly they move on. When our eye rests, it means especially and actually it is the time we gaze at some things. So what does word
saccade?
Okay. What does this word means? When we say saccade or saccades and fixation, it means saccade is movement of the eye. We have a fixation. We will devote some specific times to fixation, and then we have saccades or saccades. In any eye tracking camera, cameras monitor the eyes. When we use the eye tracking test, some cameras monitor the eyes, and then computer calculate where the eyes fixate on a visual display and for how long. They measure the time your eyes fixate on a visual display and measure the time of this fixation. This is a great method for reading. Why? It is important for reading because unlike SPR or self-paced reading test, when we use SPR, this method requires no overt response. In self-paced reading, you need overt responses, but in this method, you require no overt response, like pressing a button to reveal a new chunk of text. And unlike other online measures, like even related brain potential and fMRI, it can handle, in fact, pretty naturalistic presentation of a text. Very naturalistic presentation. Researchers can, if he or she wants, just display a paragraph, just one paragraph, or he or she may want to just display one sentence and record a pattern of fixation and saccades as someone read it. Of course, this method is not completely naturalistic. Participants in an eye tracking study are likely to be wearing a headband that holds the camera, or have to rest their head on a chain rest, for example, in order to keep it steady. So it is not some very naturalistic. You have to follow this discipline. Some types of eye trackers even require people to bend down on a bike bar to keep their head stable for cameras that are located on the table. Okay, the camera put on the table, and they have to they require to bite down on a bike bar or to keep their heads stable. Anyway, some eye trackers do not require any of these ways, but participants must still keep their heads as still as possible, and it's due to the participants to keep their heads still and without motion or motionless. One example of an eye tracking setup is shown in figure 3.1, As you can see, it's unlikely that people forget and that they are in experiment. The people are so, because the condition is very interesting, and they forget that they are in an experiment. In addition to, as you can see, in addition to allowing researchers to collect online data about language processing with language stimulant presented in relatively natural way, eye tracking provides a wealth of data, particularly compared with SPR or self-paced reading. Eye tracking is more strong method. And in SPR, you generally get a few data points for each sentence. One, for example, one for each time the participant presses a button to continue. But eye tracking gives you more complex set of data, which can be measured in a number of different ways. First, as with SPR, we can look at single word or a set of words. Like SPR, the participant can look at a single word or a set of words. We can refer to this in general as interest area. It depends on examiner and the participant interest. So, for example, you could measure the amount of time from when the participant first look at an interest area until the participant, for example, moves on to fixate on another area. This is referred to as the first pass reading time. Okay? You can also measure the length of the very first fixation in an interest area. It's possible for you to measure the length, the amount of time used for example, fixation in interest area. This is generally used when the interest area is single word. This is often called the first fixation time. First fixation time. It means the first fixation in an interest area. We call it first fixation time. These are fairly obvious types of things to measure and tell us some things about how long it takes readers to read word when they first encounter it. But we can also look at other things. For instance, we could look to see how long it took from when someone first looked at interest area until they look, for example, ahead into the next. This would include any regressive or backward-looking eye movement into previous text, and so would measure how long it took before a reader felt ready to continue on into the rest of text. This measure is a regression path or go past time. And when participants, in fact, goes back or comes back and look to the previous item. We could also measure the total amount of time someone spent fixating on an interest area before they indicated that they were finished with a whole trial. This is called, unsurprisingly, the total time. One could also measure the percentage of regression out of the interest area. How long does participant, in fact, use for regression? For example, looking to see whether a certain aspect of sentence made the readers more likely to look back into previous text. Anyway, not every research study uses eye measure. It means this method will not be used in any kind of research. Though these are a subset of most commonly reported ones, and in general measures are, though in fact all the measures we talk about it till now, measures, in fact, are thought to either reflect early process during reading, like first pass, or early and later process, like total time. Taken together, these types of measures can provide a fairly complete picture of how people take in information while they read. While you can get a lot of important data just by placing text on one screen, as we said, we place the text on a screen, and analyzing the eye movement of the participants, you can also be a little bit sneaky and create a dynamic display that changes based on where the participant is looking. Okay? This has been used to gain a better understanding of fundamental aspect of information as taken in during reading. In one version, the boundary techniques, one display is shown to reader, and then when their eyes cross an invisible boundary, this display changes. This can be used to determine how important upcoming information is during reading. For example, the first display in the technique might be a sentence. Okay, the first display, we want to use this technique, we want to show a sentence. The first display in this technique might be a sentence like this: the waiter draw QPCB the glasses. But when the participant gazes across an invisible boundary at the end of waiter, after the word waiter, the display change during the saccade to put the word drop instead of draw QPCB. It means the different letters, unwanted letters comes at the end of this word. Researchers can vary the words involved and how much is changed at the boundary to see what information influences whether readers take longer to read after a change. Anyway, eye tracking technique as a whole are also not limited to just studying written languages, but can also be used to investigate spoken languages too. The visual word paradigm, is a relatively new application of eye tracking technology that has generated a lot of interesting among researchers and has provided new windows onto how and when information is integrated during both word and sentence processing. In this technique, participants look at an array of pictures. The participant look at an array of pictures while listening to language stimuli, and researchers may vary variables within the visual scene or language. For example, one of the first studies to see this method examined the resolution of temporary referential ambiguities. For example, an image that you heard, please pay attention to this. Imagine a condition in which you hear this sentence: put the apple on the towel in the box. At the same time that you see 4 real world objects: put the apple on the towel in the box. A towel, an empty box, an apple that is on a towel, and in a pencil. The pencil is not important, so we will ignore it. But the rest of the pictures matter. This sentence combined with this set of objects is at least temporarily ambiguous. When you hear on the towel, it's not clear whether you are listening to the description of an apple or if you should put the apple on the towel. We don't know. So some scientists, for example, Tannenhaus and his colleagues, found that in this case, people look to other towels quite a bit, okay, compared with when there is a second apple on a napkin instead of that pencil. In this case, people look to both apples. Settle on the apple on the towel and then look to the box. In terms of when people look to objects or a picture of objects, they do so very rapidly after identifying the words that label it. In the case of verbs, several studies have shown that people will make anticipatory look to the most likely next word. Anticipatory looks. Most of the people will make anticipatory look to the most likely next word based on the knowledge about the verb and the object in the picture. For example, Altman and Campbell in 1999 found that when we hear the word eat, it is a verb. When we hear it in a descriptive sentence like the boy will eat the cake, people would look to the things in the picture that could be eaten even before hearing the word that labeled it. After hearing the word eat, they are they have an anticipatory look, since by the verb eating, they know that something might be eaten. So they are looking for some things which could be eaten. So these two applications of eye tracking, reading and the visual word paradigm, mean that eye tracking is well suited to studying both written and spoken language. In both cases, it provides a rich data set for ongoing processing with relatively little interventions by the researchers. Participants are certainly aware of the eye tracker, but the stimuli presented can be natural and no overt. Conscious response from the participant is necessary. So it's enough till here. We comes to the title, event-related brain potential. Event. The next topic is event-related brain potential, which is on page 48. It's enough for this session. Thanks for your attention. I hope you enjoy this topic. Thank you very much.